We were still underrepresented. So I'm sorry, I'm too angry to go through your mental exercise here because the system is so rigged. I don't care what part of the country you're going, first of all, it doesn't matter that it was in Minneapolis. Look at Rodney King. This problem?
It's a global problem.
Well, I'm not worried about the globe right now. I can't handle the globe.
Globe being United States, not the world.
Yes. Yeah. It's a national problem.
National problem. Your anger would take a lot to mitigate and a lot of change.
So let me say this. I've expressed my anger. Now let me express my hope.
That's where I was going. What's next?
But before I express my hope, and I do have feelings of hope. All right. And there were some positive things that occurred in this trial that may be indicators of where we're moving to. All right. But I have to back up and say, look at what we've done to our children, our adult children, our young people who now have to deal with this problem. I have Black college students that have had a lifetime of seeing no recourse in the courts. Think about that. We now have a nation of Black young adults and white young adults who have seen the hypocrisy of our judicial system as it applies to BIPOC citizens. And I believe that it was those young adults on that jury that was able to come to that decision. For the first time, we threw the dice randomly and got a just decision. But I still don't think it would have happened if it hadn't been for that video.
Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
Hi, I'm Dr. Philip Nelson, and I want to welcome you to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a series of conversations about social justice and racial issues that began after the death of George Floyd. It's been nearly a year and the verdict is in. This conversation is about that verdict. It's entitled A Glimmer of Justice. I hope it makes you think, and I also hope you'll share with others.
There was some irony as, we're on the call with Peggy at the same time that the verdict came down. I got pinged on my phone and Peggy got pinged on hers, and you were doing your thing and being oblivious to the rest of the world and trying to be a good dean.
Yeah.
I was waiting to find an opportunity, which came up at the end, to bring it forth. You didn't have a lot of time to think and create a reply, as much as it's like, oh, that was pretty much what it felt like, was, oh, almost like you weren't surprised.
Well, how did you feel about it?
Relieved. I thought that the right verdict came down. In talking to Sharon and thinking about it, there are so many other situations where contrary outcomes had occurred. Mm-hmm. We had just got done over the weekend, I believe, watching the show on CNN about the mom versus the KKK. It was about a murder that happened 40 years ago in Alabama, where a KKK member was found guilty of murdering and lynching a Black guy. He was 20. Then Beulah May, his mom, also won a civil suit against the KKK.
And bankrupted the KKK.
So I looked at that from 40 years ago, and I looked at all of the other different verdicts that had occurred in the last 40 years, and you're relieved that the jury, with the evidence that was there, made the right decision.
So you said that was your initial reaction.
As soon as I saw it come across the phone, it was like,
You took a deep breath.
yeah.
And would you use the same words to describe how you feel now? It's been what, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So it's been 4 days since the decision. Have your feelings changed any, or do you still feel relief?
Specifically speaking about the verdict and nothing else that's gone on in this freaking week, I'm relieved about the verdict and the fact that rioting and protests have been tempered. Not to say that we haven't dealt with a plethora of other police and people related violence in the last week. It's like, oh my God, it's just so hard to wrap your arms around and fathom everything that's going on out there. So yes, I feel relief from that standpoint. I am pleased that up until now, we haven't imploded. Minneapolis hasn't imploded. Other large cities haven't imploded. It's not to say that the news media hasn't continued to try to put gasoline on the fire, but I feel, yeah, I still feel a sense of relief. And maybe a hope that, and the same thing that I would have thought after the trial in Beulah May trial in 1981, or whenever it was, a feeling of hope that maybe justice and the right outcomes could occur, because there was a plethora of cases prior to that where even with evidence to the contrary, there were innocent verdicts in cases of guilty people.
In your opinion?
Well, and I guess it's my opinion, yes.
Yeah. No, probably in the opinion of most of Americans who would look at it from a non-biased point of view.
Right.
But if you believe in the system, which I'm beginning, or if you believe in the system, you have to give the jury, you don't know what the jury saw, right? And so there's always that doubt that in those cases where you question the judgment, that it may have been the fault of the prosecuting attorney, or it may have been a technicality that prevented certain information from being presented to the jury. Now, I realize I'm being unusually gracious here when I say these kind of things, but I have to, because I have to at least admit the possibility, because if I don't, then I step into the crevasse that racists step into when they assume that this recent judgment was out of intimidation, that this recent judgment was out of bullying. I realized after we hung up, when we had this meeting, and just to be clear, and for our audience sake, you and I had a business meeting about something else when the verdict was announced, and you picked it up on your phone, and you just said that you thought I was rather, you didn't use the word, but it seemed that you thought I was a little cavalier about the judgment, that you were expecting a certain response from me and you didn't get it. And maybe it's because you assume it's because I hadn't had a chance to think about it.
Yeah, well, I think, we came out of a 30, 45 minute business meeting, and, I think I said, have you seen the news?
Right.
And you said, no, what news? I said, guilty on all charges. And Peggy validated that. I think all you said was something like good, or something very simple. And I'm not sure that I expected you to jump out of your chair and do a dance, but I think I didn't get an emotional response. I got a logical response.
Yeah. And that was on purpose, I think. My emotions are all over the place. First of all, I think I was very reserved all day that day. I thought the verdict was appropriate, as you said, a logical response. Everybody thinks that, right? It's not about the verdict. I'm going to say some things that might trigger you or whatever. There's no other way to address it other than to say it. So this is one of those real courageous conversations here. But when I heard you say that you were relieved, I'm trying to figure out, why were we so worried that a jury couldn't come to the right decision? Why were we so concerned? Even OJ's trial wasn't as transparent as this one was. If you were truly interested in it, we were able to see the discussions without the jury. We were able to see the discussions between the lawyers and the judge. We were able to see witnesses testify that I thought was almost on the verge of stupidity when the judge said, and you better not ask this question or there will be a mistrial. And they still brought that witness back. And that witness had a problem not answering questions directly sometimes. I was on pins and needles thinking this guy's going to get off on this trial because of a technicality. And the prosecuting attorney was adroit and guided that witness appropriately and got through that little tight turn, and the trial continued. Maxine Waters complicated things with her statement. If you were interested in the trial, all those things were interesting. But after seeing everything that came out in that trial, there shouldn't have been any doubt what the verdict was going to be. And yet the entire country had doubt. Half the country believed that he was innocent because they believed he was doing his job. And that's how you do it. The other half saw it and believed he was guilty, but didn't trust the jury to do it. Why? Because they've rarely done it before. That's the problem. That's why all you got from me was good. Because this is one verdict, one policeman, one additional Black man that is dead. But this doesn't make up for all the other people that didn't receive justice, whatever that is. And so I didn't understand myself why I was so reserved. I now know it's because I'm angry. I was busy that day, so I didn't go out on the streets, and I didn't run to the TV. I waited until I had time to see the news when I normally see the news. And Doris saved the reading of the verdict, and I watched it. And when I finished, she looked at me, and I just looked at her, and I said, why am I supposed to be happy? Why am I supposed to be happy about this? You know, when you say you didn't expect me to jump up and down, I was sitting there watching people in the streets celebrating. We're celebrating a verdict that should have been expected. I don't get that. And you're almost celebrating a verdict of a death of a Black man. I don't get that. But what I do get is that we're so polarized that we don't get it. They did the right thing. That's a very low bar for me. That's what I expect. And I don't think it was difficult at all. And then I hear Tucker Carlson sit there and interview a chief of police and said, what about this verdict? And I'm not worried about the protection of this guy. I mean, he committed a crime. What I'm worried about is, when are you going to enforce the law? What if somebody breaking the windows into Macy's? Are you going to enforce the law then? To equivocate breaking into a department store and killing a person over a $20 bill is the problem. And I don't give a damn about this verdict right now, because the problem is still the problem. Black lives still don't matter. And they've proven that 4 times in the last 4 days across the country. Now, I don't know the incidents, but I do know this. We've had 220 deaths by police this year in the United States. Great Britain only has 22 deaths in an entire year on average as a result of a firearm by police. Our first problem is we're too gun happy. We are a violent society. But my second problem is that the problem is policing. And I don't care if they are Black or white police. They're trained to control, not to serve. And I believe that when they are in a Black environment, priority is to control. And if there's any threat to their authority to control, particularly with Black patrons or Black victims, they're more likely to pull a gun than to reason. An angry Black man is a superhuman being to them. And the only way they can control him is to pull a gun. I have no idea how the incident of the young girl in Columbus is going to come out. But I do know, and I recognize that the young girl herself was threatening someone somehow. I've seen the body cam video 3 or 4 times, and I can't tell what's going on. And it may be that the shooting was a viable option. But my problem is that if I substitute the color of those people, I don't think he would have pulled his gun so rapidly. I think he might have approached with his hand on the gun, but it would have stayed in the holster until he absolutely had to pull it. But it's kind of like the Black soldier in Virginia. They had that gun out before they even approached the car. Dante, that got shot in Minneapolis. They wouldn't have tased a white man. They would have thought about, well, I got his tag number. I can get him. He's not going anywhere. But the propensity to control the situation, we can't be out of control. George Floyd is dead largely because of the need to control the police, and overwhelming force is our mantra. This is how we fight wars, with overwhelming force. Then we have a war on drugs and a war on this and a war on that. And the police are always at war. And the bigger the Black man, the more force you need. The more agitated a Black person is, the more force you need, rather than the more reason you need. And so I'm not relieved. And part of your relief, you said, is because of the verdict, there was no need to riot. The protests are tempered. Well, guess what? I'm worried about January 6th again. I'm worried about the other protest, the one where we don't decide to shoot until after they get inside the Capitol, because we're still getting messages from those same people that it's not over. And their kin are passing laws left and right saying, I can't vote, and creating myths about the vote in Arizona. And the state legislatures are doing their best to retain power. No, I am not relieved. And I am not happy. A Black man is still dead and a cop is in jail. What is there to be happy about in this situation? If you forget about color, a man is dead and a man is in jail for killing for murdering that man. That's justice. That's what we expect to happen. There's a joke a cartoon where a deputy finds a Black man hanging by a rope with his arms behind his back, handcuffed, with a rope wrapped around him. So his arms are bound to his body by a rope. His legs are bound together by a rope at the ankles. And the sheriff shows up. And the sheriff walks up and views the scene. And the deputy said, "What do you think?" And the sheriff says, "Worst case of suicide I've ever seen."
Yeah. If you thought your comments would differ from the way I feel, they don't. I don't have the same anger and emotional response, but I do agree with each and every statement that you made. I think if this were the last of the trials that would ever have to be conducted of a Black being killed by a cop, then maybe there'd be a reason to celebrate. But since it's pretty obvious in the time since the trial ended that is not the end, and that these issues will continue, that my relief, as I stated earlier, was very short-lived. It was relief to a specific verdict and a specific point in time, but there is obviously an ongoing, apparently never-ending use of force and control as a response and actually as a reaction. And it is your comments about being a violent society. I was thinking everybody seems to be on edge and it's COVID, but no, I mean, this goes back before COVID. The George Floyd situation from May of 2020 was early on in the COVID situation. This goes on for more years, 400 years of ongoing tension. And yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with anything that you said, and I fully agree with your anger because you're seeing it as two families that got disrupted by the outcome, one dead, one in jail, but the problem goes on.
Yeah, but I'm not sure you understand. Well, I know you do. You just didn't, but you haven't voiced it to my satisfaction as far as the entrenchment of the problem in the system. The problem that we could not trust that the jury would actually believe their eyes and respond accordingly is because deep down we understand that the system is rigged.
Well, I was heading towards the fact that, we choose 12, 11, 13, I don't know how many people were on the jury to make a decision. Their charge is to make it upon the facts. And I've been around long enough to realize that way too many jury trials are not based upon the facts, but based upon the acts. And I mean the acts of the actors named the defense attorney and the prosecuting attorney. And it's based upon the feelings and personal beliefs of the individuals that are on the jury. It would be interesting, and I made a note of this early on in the conversation, if jury trials were conducted by computers, given facts and focusing on facts and using artificial intelligence to make decisions, how different would the outcomes be? I don't know, and I'm not going there right now, but I think that I have seen enough jury trials or even attorney general decisions in cities, Louisville, where a case was never even tried because the decisions weren't being based on facts, but we were being based on pressures and politics. And I think that's a big part of where relief comes from. It's a big part of why it will take a long time for me to feel comfortable that any case similar to the George Floyd case will have a factually based outcome and not I don't want to say emotional, but a non-factually based outcome, an opinion-based outcome. So I fully think that the system is rigged, and I fully agree that there's got to be a better way to do it, but I don't know. I don't have an answer on that one.
Yeah. And again, I actually have no problem with the jury system. I think it's much more complicated than that. And I wouldn't want a computerized judgment because, as you know, in administration, facts are interpreted differently by different people. And the jury system is an attempt to reflect the consensus of society as best they can. What the problem is that the jury system can be easily tainted. It can be easily misdirected. And just because it is, doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad or wrong. Our problem is how we develop the jury, how we develop the citizens that serve on the jury, and how fairly we select the jury. Most of the juries that resulted in the questionable decisions that you've been talking about were not necessarily fairly representative of the community. Some of the decisions that we questioned were biased by the fact that we tend to give the authority, the police, the benefit of the doubt, as opposed to looking at the facts. I'm not excusing the decisions. I'm saying that the reasons are complicated, but all of them lead to bias. All of them lead to bias. And the fact that many of the trials that deal with police brutality are overwhelmingly represented by people of color as the victims is a result of the bias system itself. And so when enforcement and judiciary are both biased, you've got a group of people that are under a thumb. My anger is not about justice system. My anger is I am 66 years old. I can come up with less than a handful of decisions that seem just to me.
Question. There are 50 states in the union. This event happened to have occurred in Minnesota, Minneapolis. What if it had occurred in New York, Alabama, Texas, California, Washington, South Dakota? The jury makeup and the jury decision making, are they not influenced by the cultural environment from which the people are chosen and the community within which they are living?
They're supposed to be.
So could there have been different outcomes based upon location?
Of course.
But that shouldn't be the case, right?
I understand. But of course, look, I grew up in a state where you didn't have a Black person on the jury until routinely until the 70s or 80s. So imagine all those cases. The police forces in those cities have sterling records because of the juries that were selected then. And even when there was an attempt to get representation on juries, we were still underrepresented. So I'm sorry, I'm too angry to go through your mental exercise here because the system is so rigged. I don't care what part of the country you're going, first of all, it doesn't matter that it was in Minneapolis. Look at Rodney King. This problem?
It's a global problem.
Well, I'm not worried about the globe right now. I can't handle the globe.
Globe being United States, not the world.
Yes. Yeah. It's a national problem.
National problem. Your anger would take a lot to mitigate and a lot of change.
So let me say this. I've expressed my anger. Now let me express my hope.
That's where I was going. What's next?
But before I express my hope, and I do have feelings of hope. All right. And there were some positive things that occurred in this trial that may be indicators of where we're moving to. All right. But I have to back up and say, look at what we've done to our children, our adult children, our young people who now have to deal with this problem. I have Black college students that have had a lifetime of seeing no recourse in the courts. Think about that. We now have a nation of Black young adults and white young adults who have seen the hypocrisy of our judicial system as it applies to BIPOC citizens. And I believe that it was those young adults on that jury that was able to come to that decision. For the first time, we threw the dice randomly and got a just decision. But I still don't think it would have happened if it hadn't been for that video. As a matter of fact, when the first news article that came out about George Floyd said he died of medical causes, it said nothing about questionable police tactics. It
I
just,
was not aware of that.
yes. The very first article that came out in the major newspaper glossed over it. He just died.
So it took the video to escalate.
Yes. We wouldn't have even known about it if it hadn't been for the video.
I mean, I guess I would suggest it as a juror and as a prosecutor. Isn't the video evidence enough to have found a guilty verdict?
Well, of course it was. It happened. Yeah, but what about those deaths where there's no witness, where there's no video?
Yeah.
There are plenty of witnesses, but no video.
Yeah, the camera was turned off, huh?
You know,
Body cam.
Is that when we start giving the police the benefit of the doubt? Most of the cases that I know about before now, there's always the question of, well, why were you pulled over? Why were you even there? Why are you in trouble?
Well, wasn't Dante pulled over because he had something hanging from his rearview mirror?
Because he had air freshener hanging from his rear. I heard that was the reason. I also heard that he was pulled over because his car tag had expired. The first time I heard it was because his car tag had expired, right? Somehow the air freshener became an issue too. I don't know if that's why they pulled him over or not. Neither one of those things required me to tase him.
No.
After they pulled him over, then they found out there was a warrant for his arrest. And so then they tried to handcuff him. And a black cop was trying to handcuff him. And the black cop was trying to handle him humanely. And then he bolted. But the black cop was a rookie cop. I guess Dante realized he could get away. He tried. It was the 26-year experienced white cop that said, "Oh, no, you don't. You're not running. I can't let you crank the car up and get away. I'm going to tase you." The same thing happened to the guy that died in Atlanta. You don't get to run. I've lost control. I can't have a black man that I can't control. That's the message being sent.
So the words behind you, and the people who are listening to this can't see the screen, but the words behind you of empathy, compassion, caring, equality, respect, equity, those are core values that the police could benefit from.
Yeah. I guess my problem is I don't think people understand the comparison. Everybody was surprised that on January 6th, that crowd was not resisted with more force. And it's that reluctance to use force on a white crowd compared to an almost eagerness to use force on a black crowd. Or it's that choice to use reason and respect with a white person who has violated a traffic law, and an eagerness to make sure that the policeman is respected by a person of color. One of the people on January 6th, Jack Wade Whitten is his name, flew from Georgia, was part of the crowd. He attacked a policeman. He beat that policeman to the ground. Then he got another policeman, pulled him by his face mask down the steps across the policeman he had just beat. And then later on, he charged the police line. And then he was stopped by a fellow protester. He backed off. And then he charged them again and then told the police, "You all are going to die today." And then he got into the Capitol. And then he got to go back to his hotel room. And the next day he flew home. And then a week later, the FBI, or 2 weeks later, the FBI finally arrested him, and a Georgia judge let him go. And then a federal judge had to say, "Wait a minute, this guy did this. We have him on tape beating 2 policemen. We have him on tape threatening, in general, the police. But this guy gets to go home." I doubt that if that had been Antifa, I doubt anybody would have survived. I didn't know we had as many white Antifa members as they claim, but there's a clear discrepancy here that has played out psychologically. And what's fearful for me is the excitement that we had about the right verdict. It is the perverse pleasure that we received about the right verdict. That's what is disappointing to me.
Well,
Now, the hope comes from the fact that our young adults recognize that disparity. And as long as we don't get focused on defunding the police and reforming the police, I have hope that it's going to happen, because I believe that the work that was done during the civil rights movement, I believe that the work that we've been doing continuously is paying off in our children.
Do you remember George Benson's song entitled Children of Our Future? Children are our future?
Yes.
You just said it.
I believe the children are our future. Keep them well and let them lead the way. Yeah, I remember that.
Show them all the beauty they possess inside. Give them a sense of pride. To make it easier, let the children's laughter remind us how we used to be. Everybody is searching for a hero. Who could be someone to look up to? That's where we are. And hopefully it's our children.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.